My name is Ann Lin. I'm the director of the Lieberthal-Rogel Center for Chinese Studies, and on behalf of the center, welcome to today's MLK Day production. We are so delighted to have one of our center associates, Eli Wu, with us today. Eli is the Associate Professor of Women's and Gender Studies at the University of Michigan and also Associate Professor in History. She is the author of Reproducing Women, Medicine, Metaphor, and Childbirth in Late Imperial China, published by the University of California Press. She has a BA in Political Science from the University of California at Berkeley, an MA in International Relations, and a Ph.D. in History from Yale University. She was a faculty member at Albion College for 13 years before joining us here at the University of Michigan. Eli writes about society, culture, and the body, and has examined breast cancer, medical iconography, forensics, bone setting, the circulation of Chinese medicine in Korea, and Chinese views of European medicine. She's completing a new monograph on the history of medicine for injuries and wounds in China, using this subfield of literate medicine to explore how experiences of the material and structural body shape the development of Chinese medical thought. We are absolutely delighted to have her today to talk about a project that she just completed, editing this special edition of editing this special issue to focus on the contribution of African Americans to Asian medicine in the United States. Eli, welcome.
Thank you very much. And I know we have a full house today, and hello to everyone on Zoom land. I am now going to do this really amazing thing where I try to share my screen with you. So if you just hold on a second. Okay, great. Thank you so much, Anne, for that introduction. For me, Martin Luther King Jr. Day is a day to reflect on what does it mean to be an activist scholar. Now, as you just heard, my area of research is the history of Chinese medicine from about 1600 to 1800. And so looking for ways to use that research in an activist way can sometimes be a little challenging. But I wear another hat too, in addition to my work at UM, and that is I'm on the editorial board of 2 academic journals. Now, when people think of editors, you usually think probably of someone who's correcting your commas or checking your wording, but actually editors have a lot of power to shape what gets published. They have the potential to shape field-wide conversations by highlighting and amplifying voices that they consider to be important and giving them a wider audience and a platform. And so on this Martin Luther King Jr. Day, when we think about how we can make change in the world, I'm really grateful to LRCCS for inviting me here to talk about a project that I've been working on for the better part of a year that finally got published last October. And that is this special edition of Asian Medicine, which I worked on with my co-editor at Asian Medicine, Daniel Burton Rose, who is our area editor for East Asia. Now, if you can, I know some of you are watching on your phones, but if you can see the title, Asian Medicine is a journal for the International Association for the Study of Traditional Asian Medicine. And we publish articles on a wide range of healing methods used now and historically in South Asia, East Asia, Central Asia, and the Himalayan region, as well as transnational and global forms of Asian medicine. And our authors and readers include practitioners of Asian medicine today, as well as academics studying Asian medicine from a wide range of disciplinary perspectives. And some people are both practitioners and academics. Now, I'm the senior editor, which means I'm the backup to the editor-in-chief. And in the summer of 2020, during the worldwide demonstrations calling for an end to police violence and for anti-racist activism, I and our editor-in-chief, Pierre Salguero, were talking about how we could contribute meaningfully to anti-racist work. And like many organizations, we thought about making a statement, but ultimately we decided that we wanted to do something that would have a real impact going forward beyond the current moment that people could use as a resource for future work and contemplation. And we also wanted to really engage our readership in a conversation that we thought was very important, and give them things to think about and engage with. So ultimately, I and Daniel created and co-edited the special issue, featuring the life stories and perspectives of 3 African-American acupuncturists who have been active in social justice efforts, notably including using acupuncture as a tool for social justice and for addressing racial disparities in healthcare. At the heart of this issue is the idea that the Black Lives Matter movement is directly relevant to those who study and practice Asian medicines, regardless of whether or not they live in the United States. That's because it offers us an important opportunity and a vehicle for thinking about what kinds of power structures we are enmeshed in, both as practitioners and as scholars. And in my editorial introduction to this, I made a number of points on this regard. For example, Asian medicine as practiced today evolved in a historical process in a colonial and post-colonial world structured around biased and racist structures and hierarchies, including anti-Blackness. At the same time, to advocate Asian medicine is to advocate for the importance of diversity in healthcare, to challenge the biomedical model by saying that practices that arose in the rest of the world are as important as those practices that arose in the imperializing West. The third thing is that Asian medicines routinely argue for whole body and whole person medicine, for holism. So we also need to consider what kinds of implicit biases we might bring to the clinical encounter, and also the kinds of questions that we ask as scholars when we try to study these practices. And finally, there's a case to be made that Asian medicines can provide a meaningful healthcare resource for those who are marginalized by biomedicine, as well as those who are suffering from the emotional and physical traumas of racism that biomedicine is not equipped to treat. So I'm going to be expanding on these themes, but before I get any further, I'd like to go ahead and introduce to you the 3 individuals who are featured in our special issue. And the first one, you see this picture, this is from the April 22nd, 1972 issue of the Black Panther newsletter, talking about a Black Panther delegation to China. And this gentleman here in circle is our first interviewee, Dr. Tolbert Small, MD. Now, we have 3 articles about the career of Tolbert Small, which I'll talk about in a bit. But he went to China with the Black Panther delegation in 1972, and he became one of the first US physicians to practice acupuncture alongside of biomedicine when he returned. And so we have an interview with Dr. Small conducted by Daniel Burton-Rose and myself. We have a photo essay from which this picture on the upper right hand is taken, called Bringing Acupuncture to the People, looking at Tolbert Small's experiences both in China and in California, where he was practicing. And we have a contribution by Ina Meng, shown here with Dr. Small last year, who is currently a MD Ph.D. student at Harvard, who is one of the people who has been working with Dr. Small to preserve his archival materials related to his career. And she is writing on reflections on remaking history, African American acupuncturists and the archives of Tolbert Small, thinking very intentionally about how does our view of practice and history change when we incorporate the voices of African American practitioners who have not historically been recognized as much as they should be. And then we have 2 interviews that I conducted with 2 practitioners right now who are interested in issues of social justice, and who in the summer of 2020 were among the leading voices calling for the acupuncture profession to examine its internal dynamics. One is Tanisha Dandridge, who is a practitioner in Sacramento, California. And for both of these interviews, we talked over a wide range of topics, including how they got interested in acupuncture. I don't have time to go through all these stories, but like many people, they got interested when they experienced benefits from it. And Tanisha Dandridge is very active in trying to use acupuncture as a way to address racial disparities in healthcare. And she is the co-founder and president of the Black Acupuncturist Association. And my other interviewee was Denise Tyson, who is currently serving as the president of the Maryland Acupuncturist Society. And during the summer of 2020, she was among the people calling on the American Society of Acupuncturists, for of which the Maryland Society is a chapter, to look intentionally at the patterns of bias and to work for greater inclusivity. Okay. And then I just wanted to note before I go on that this issue is available open access, so free on the internet. And we felt it was really important, having created this resource, to make sure that it would be available to anyone who would like to use it. And so I'd like to give thanks to our publisher, Brill, who gave us a substantial discount on the fees and made it feasible for us to raise the money to do this. And I'd also like to thank Ruby Tapia, my chair at the UM Women's and Gender Studies Department, for helping me find some additional funding to cover these. And I believe that Carol, yes, has just put the link in the chat box. Okay, and I want to say that initially we had approached our interviewees with the idea of writing editorial pieces, but since they're all very busy with their own practices, we decided it would be more feasible for us to interview them. But we collaborated with them throughout the process of editing the interviews. So it was very much a group effort. Okay, so before I get into some additional discussion of the issue and the background out of which it grown, I need to issue a disclaimer, because usually when people give talks at LRCCS, they are talking about their work as scholars, about their original research. But today I want to emphasize, I am talking about other people's research. I am relying on findings generated by many other scholars and activists, and I'm talking about other people's stories. And then this includes the work of people who are already studying African-American contributions to US acupuncture and questioning received histories well before we became on the scene. So I really see our contribution as helping to amplify voices that were already there, helping to create a critical mass of interest, and providing these articles that people can use as they disseminate this information further. So to add to the resources that are available to us. And in the articles, you'll see they all have full bibliographies. They're all densely footnoted. And our goal was that a practitioner somewhere else in another part of the world who didn't know anything about, US politics or US organizations would be able to understand everything clearly because we footnoted and explained all the things referred to. So I think this is also a really good resource for teaching. And so I would welcome you all to take a look at that. Okay. So now let me talk a little bit more about the background out of which this issue came. We're thinking about scholarly activism. Okay, so first I just want to talk a little bit about the acupunctural field as a whole. And I will not have much time in this presentation to address the question that always comes up, which is, does acupuncture work? Okay, and I think that as a broad explanation, I think it's fair to say that many people have obtained benefits from using acupuncture. And because so many people have obtained benefits from using acupuncture, we have had decades of researchers trying to ascertain what the efficacy could be, what kinds of things it could be used for. And we also have historically a profession of acupuncturists advocating for both more research and for recognition of acupuncture as a profession. And the latest State of the Profession report given by the American Society of Acupuncturists notes there are over 30,000 licensed acupuncturists in the United States, and there is a licensing and examination and certification process that one must go through to become a licensed acupuncturist. There are 50 different schools where one can learn acupuncture. These include schools that are already accredited, and there's also an accreditation process for schools as well as candidates for accreditation. And as I mentioned, the interest in acupuncture has been supported by great patient demand, and a survey in 2016 by the American Specialty Health Incorporated group, which is a managed health organization for various complementary medicines, did a survey of their in-network providers, some 6,000 licensed acupuncturists and some 89,000 patients who received acupuncture treatment in 2014 and 2015. And they found that patient satisfaction with the outcomes of the treatment ranged from 85 to 93%. Okay, so the issue of whether it works, I think, is very difficult, but I think certainly we can say that it is an active practice. It has received legislative recognition, professional recognition, because people are receiving benefits from it. And among the people who are studying acupuncture are people here at the University of Michigan, including Richard Harris, who is also associated with the Chronic Pain Research Center, and he is one of the current co-presidents of the Society for Acupuncture Research. And also my friend Susanna Zick, who is with the Integrated Family Medicine Center here at UM, and one of her studies is funded by the Department of Defense on the use of acupressure. So not needles, but self-administered acupressure for cancer patients. There's been intensified interest in acupuncture as well recently because of the opioid crisis. And Ina Meng has studied this and has spoken of a third wave in acupuncture's popularity in the United States. Acupuncture actually was being used in the United States in the 19th century and enjoyed much popularity before declining for various reasons, one of which was rising anti-Chinese sentiments. And the opioid crisis has also been cited by the Department of Defense as one of the reasons that they're very interested in acupuncture. And a form of ear acupuncture known as battlefield acupuncture, and you see the illustration here from the Department of Defense, is being used to treat chronic pain in veterans. And the text that accompanied this image said it's being employed in a new pain management center in West Virginia to help combat the opioid crisis. So that's kind of what I'm going to say about the question of, acupuncture's efficacy. To the extent that many people feel that it is useful, there is also this question of how accessible is it, right? And to whom, and who are the power holders in the acupunctural profession? Okay. So one of the critiques that came up, and it's a critique that's existed for a while, but became particularly intense starting in December 2020, was what happens when acupuncture is seen as predominantly an upper class practice, predominantly of white clients and white practitioners. And if you Google acupuncture on the web, you always get these pictures, a lot of times, of a white woman, either doing yoga or having acupuncture. And the association, the American Society of Acupuncturists study did a survey of their membership, and of the over 1,900 people who responded, this is the breakdown. So some 71% were female, and of self-reported ethnicity, close to 66% were white, and only about 1.8% were Black or African American. And having looked at these reports over the last few years, that number of African American practitioners has not changed. And that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about. Okay. And here's a quote from 2018 to show that this is not a new concern. in an article entitled Integrative Medicine and the Imperative for Health Justice, Maria Chow and Shelley Adler note that, ironically, integrative medicine, a field predicated on medical pluralism and diverse approaches to health and well-being, has not completely shed its reputation as an elite medicine for the worried well. More recently, the stereotype of the typical consumer of integrative medicine has been transformed dramatically following several large surveys indicating that complementary health approaches are most common among well-educated, well-off white European Americans. Integrative medicine has come to be thought of as a pricey, non-essential healthcare practice for the overserved. And this perception of the field as a predominantly white is also seen in the advertisements and web pages for different acupuncture schools, right? And that's another thing that we'll come up to. So in the summer of 2020, many organizations of integrative medicine began to do critical self-examination in addition to expressing support for the Black Lives Matter movement. And at that time, John Weeks, who was then the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Complementary and Alternative Medicine, wrote a series of blog posts about the ways in which integrative medicine was thinking about these issues. And he counted over 21 different organizations that had issued supportive statements at the time of the protests. And then the question was, you know, how long, how sustainable will these efforts be and how thorough will these efforts be? And you can see the title here of his blog post, More Integrative Responses to the Outing of Systemic Racism, Signs of Being Woke, but Are We Getting Out of Bed? And one of the issues that came up at the time was that many of the organizations in the United States are called organizations of Oriental medicine, and there is, and this is a question that had also had some history. And so there was an intensified call to remove that name from the names of organization. And many organizations are now actually in the process of removing the word Oriental from their association or school names. Now, another issue, and this is what I'm going to be talking about for the remainder of the talk, was the question of how do we understand the history of acupuncture in the United States? So I mentioned that there was an initial an early wave of interest in the 19th century. And the second, what people think of as a second wave of interest started in the 1970s. And if you read histories of acupuncture, the standard story is that James Reston, a editor and vice president of the New York Times, a Pulitzer Prize winning journalist, a buddy of Henry Kissinger, a very eminent thought leader in the United States at the time, published an article about his experiences with acupuncture in Beijing. Now, he had gone to China as one of the reporters who traveled as a guest of the Chinese government in the lead up to Nixon's historic visit, and he had an emergency appendectomy. And following his appendectomy, he had substantial discomfort, and that post-operative discomfort was treated by acupuncture. And he wrote a very favorable account of his experiences. He wrote his observations about acupuncture anesthesia in China, and he subsequently wrote additional reports. And because of his stature, because of the publication of this in the New York Times, there was a flurry of interest in acupuncture. And it's about this time subsequently that the federal government started to allocate some money for the study of whether or not this treatment was effective. Now, there's no question, okay, that James Reston had a very important influence. And many of the people who became interested in acupuncture as a result of this, they were the early pioneers of setting up schools, of trying to get licensing boards together. But there's another story as well, and that's the story that I'd like to talk about. And that is the story of acupuncture spreading as a tool of community empowerment, specifically to address racial inequities in healthcare. And as I mentioned, I'm going to be talking about the work of other people. And this is a topic that has been studied in various ways by others. And most recently, the documentary by Mia Donovan called Dope is Death really talks about this history. And the story is that in the South Bronx, the Lincoln Hospital that served the primarily minority, lower socioeconomic neighborhood was absolutely dysfunctional. And in 1970, a group of revolutionaries, including the Black Panthers and the Puerto Rican Young Lords, seized the hospital and demanded that it be given the resources to adequately serve the communities that surrounded it. And one of the major problems at the time was heroin addiction. There was an epidemic of heroin addiction. And so at that time, they set up what became known as the Lincoln Detox Center to serve the community. And one of the people who worked at the Lincoln Detox Center was Mutulu Shakur, who was an activist with the Republic of New Africa. And he is the one who is credited with introducing acupuncture as a treatment for drug addiction, specifically ear acupuncture. And he had seen it work on his sons who had been in a car accident, and he had heard about the research of doctors in Asia who were using ear acupuncture for various treatments. And so in addition to practicing acupuncture at the Lincoln Detox, he and other revolutionaries learned how to do this. They also went to Montreal to be trained in acupuncture by Canadian acupuncturists. And he founded two organizations whose history continues to resonate today, the Black Acupuncture Advisory Association of North America and the Harlem Institute of Acupuncture, where he continued to train students in acupuncture and treat patients. Now, this is important because one of the major organizations today that is using acupuncture to treat addiction is the National Acupuncture Detoxification Association. They have certified practitioners who practice all over the world. I think there's some like 20,000, 25,000 NADA practitioners around the world, according to Ina Meng. And one of the things that happened in the summer of 2020 was that there was a movement to recognize the revolutionary roots of this treatment, because previously the invention of the NADA protocol of ear acupuncture had been credited to a white psychiatrist, Michael Smith, and an acupuncturist, who founded NADA as an organization in 1985. And he had also worked at the Lincoln Detox. And so there was an effort actually to recover the revolutionaries who laid the groundwork for this protocol that Michael Smith later standardized under the NADA banner. So then it's very important to recover the history, because if you don't know the history, then you make certain assumptions about who uses this medicine and why. And so NADA was among the organizations that started to really try to diversify their understanding of how they got to be where they were. Now that was going to the East Coast. And meanwhile, on the West Coast, Tolbert Small, in a completely parallel development, was introducing acupuncture into his practice. As Alondra Nelson has shown, a major focus of the Black Panther Party activism was healthcare, to provide services for populations who were disenfranchised by the current system. So after Dr. Small graduated from Wayne State University Medical School in 1968, he moved to California to do an internship, and there he met members of the Black Panther Party. And though he was never a member of the party, he served as its physician in various capacities in the early 70s, being the director of their People's Free Medical Clinic in Berkeley, California, which was named for George Jackson, and being the director of their Sickle Cell Anemia Foundation, advocating for more research and funding for sickle cell anemia. And it's because of his involvement with the Black Panther Party that Dr. Small was invited to go with the Black Panthers to this delegation to China in 1972. And that's when he, for the first time, saw acupuncture in action. And he and some of the other delegates became very interested in learning more about acupuncture. And here you see a page of his notes taken at the time of lectures given to the delegates arranged by their Chinese hosts on acupuncture. They were also very inspired by the Chinese barefoot doctor model. And here they are with barefoot doctors in 91 in Shanxi province, up near Yan'an. And he said, the barefoot doctors learned acupuncture by doing it on themselves, and so we just did it on ourselves as well. He and other delegates obtained needles while they were on their trip and started trying to learn how to do it. Upon returning to the United States, the Panther Clinic in Oakland that Dr. Small ran became a center where he and others could continue to learn acupuncture. And David Bacon, the activist and photojournalist who was a volunteer at the clinic at the time, said, I remember vividly sitting in the George Jackson People's Free Medical Clinic in the evening after clinic hours, practicing on ourselves. We did it the Maoist way, finding the points on ourselves by looking at charts, including ones that Tolbert Small, brought back from China. It was part of the whole barefoot doctor philosophy. And another thing that they did, David Bacon had the plan to translate a number of Chinese acupuncture works into English. They only managed to do one, but here is what we believe to be the first English translation of a Chinese textbook on the studies of acupuncture. Bacon commissioned the translation and then asked Tolbert Small to write the introduction. Subsequently, Dr. Small set up the Harriet Tubman Medical Office in Oakland, California, along with his wife, Enola Price Small, who was a nurse and also had a master's in public health administration, where he continued to treat patients with both a combination of acupuncture and biomedicine, as well as teaching them how to do various acupressure techniques on themselves. So he is really a pioneer in the introduction of acupuncture to the United States. So let's talk a little bit about why this history is important. And as I mentioned, Tanisha Dandridge has been working very actively to advocate for using acupuncture to address the racial health disparity gap. But the problem that she finds is that she has difficulty convincing African American patients to use acupuncture. And she says the whitewashing of history is one of the many reasons why people of color don't use acupuncture and they don't use traditional Chinese medicine, because we've been amputated from that part of the history because it seems like something unfamiliar that upper class European Americans do. And so she says she made an attempt to get the attention of the African American community to say, this is our history. We did this. We are attached to this. And I became aware of Tanisha through this blog that she wrote that started to circulate in the summer of 2020. It was, she'd written it a couple of years before, but it started to get a lot of attention talking about the Lincoln Detox Center and the work of revolutionaries like Mutulu Shakur. And she's also advocating using acupuncture for things that biomedicine can't address, but that are real health problems. And there's been a lot of discussion of the effects of racism on people who are have to suffer racist traumas, the emotional effects, and of course the physical effects of stress of dealing with racism. And she says that again and again, the issue that I'm seeing as a clinician is that we have these legitimate, normal, healthy responses to stressful situations. And there's a limited amount of things that are available to help you deal with them, other than put a smile on your face and think happy thoughts. We're always asking people of color to do this when they've dealt with these racist situations. Right. And so one of the things that acupuncture and Chinese medicine can do is to help deal with some of these stress-related issues that biomedicine is not really equipped to deal with. And one of the things, in addition to acupuncture with needles and acupressure, is the use of ear seeds, which are little stickers with little seeds that you place on acupoints to apply continual pressure. So this is one of the things that that we talked a lot about in our interview about her project to popularize the use of ear seeds among the African American community. And the founding of the Black Acupuncturist Association was a project by her and others with the idea of let's reinvent BANA, let's reinvent the Harlem Institute of Acupuncture, right? So that we can popularize the use of this modality in the Black community. Now, one of the things that both Tanisha Dandridge and Denise Tyson talked about was how much they loved acupuncture, how much they loved Asian medicine, and how motivated they were to study it and practice it, and yet at the same time encountering various kinds of racial bias. So when Denise talked about the first time she went to the school that she attended to hear about it, she said, I went in there and I sat, and that was it for me. I was like, this is it. This is everything that I envisioned. The philosophy, the science, and the brilliance. It was just for me. And she said that at the beginning, when she started, she felt, since it was a holistic medicine, right? She was assuming that everyone would be very, very empathetic, right? Be able to connect with their patients on all different levels. But people would express surprise that she was in acupuncture school. And she said, I've even had people say to me, what? You can't be an acupuncturist. You're a Black person, right? And again, if you have a profession where it's assumed, whether subconsciously or consciously, that most practitioners are white, that most clients are white, right? It becomes a marginalizing experience that one has to work through if one doesn't fit the expected stereotype. And so one of the things that Denise Tyson did in the summer of 2020 was to send out a statement to the members of the Maryland Acupuncture Society, calling on them not only to recognize the existence of racism, but to educate themselves about the causes of structural racism in the United States, and to understand the impacts of that for their profession. And I'm going to just share with you the concluding thoughts to that very important statement. She said, I viewed the many posts on Facebook of acupuncturists in Maryland and nationwide who are educating themselves and their colleagues about the facts of racism and white privilege. Thank you to all of you who are taking a stand against systemic racism in the United States and the world. Black lives matter. I barely grazed the surface of the full history of the Black American experience. I encourage you to explore and learn more. I'm available to continue this important conversation. And so in presenting these interviews, Asian medicine is also trying to continue this conversation that is ongoing in the US acupuncture field. Here's a initiative that the American Society of Acupuncturists launched after the summer of 2020 to try to address some of these things that Denise Tyson and others were talking about. And the final thought I want to leave you with is it's not enough simply to say, here are some additional voices that we should listen to. What we also want to do is to create a transformative history. We want to change the way that we ask questions. We want to change the way in which we understand these phenomena so that we're not just adding things, but we're transforming our frameworks so that we can see new possibilities for social justice in the future. And so I'm just going to conclude by, again, thanking very much our interviewees, Tolbert Small, Tanisha Dandridge, and Denise Tyson for all their time and patience with us as we worked on this issue for well over a year. Finally published it in October, and we sent them all complimentary copies. That's Dr. Small with our journal. And I'd also like to give additional thanks for the support of our editor-in-chief, Pierre Salguero, two of our other associate editors who gave us their expert judgment, Nicole Barnes, Anna Andreeva, Chin Higley of Brill, who helped us negotiate the open access fees, and to Colin Garan, a history and grad student who transcribed hours of interview tapes for us, as well as providing other research support. And with that, I will stop, and I guess we have some time for questions. So thank you very much for listening. Okay. So tech people, I've just stopped the sharing of my screen. Do you see me again?
We see you.
Okay, good.
Ely, that's fantastic. Thank you. This is just fascinating. Thank you so much for your presentation today. The question I'm wondering about is whether you feel like there's a story here that you've talked about, which is the way that images of whiteness, of white practitioners, and of white patients, have sort of taken over the acupuncturist profession in the United States. I'm wondering if you think there's also a complementary Asian prejudice. And, I can imagine that either as Asians feeling that, white acupuncturists couldn't possibly be as good as Asian acupuncturists, and or what Asian acupuncturists feeling that African Americans certainly could not have a role in popularizing and developing the field of acupuncture.
Yeah. So I'll say that I don't feel qualified to talk in detail about the different kinds of racial and ethnic dynamics within the acupuncture field. But my impression from talking to people, right, is that you have sort of different networks, right? You have different networks. So you have the people who are, are trained, who come up through the American schools, right, who may not be of Asian ethnicity, but who learn this medicine. And then you have, for example, Asian practitioners who may have training of different kind, who may have immigrated or who may have access to other kinds of knowledge. And the sort of clientele, right, that they may be accessing may not be the same. So, I know that my parents, my first encounter with Chinese medicine was my father was very ill, and my parents happened to be in Chinatown, and they didn't believe in it at all. But he was so ill, they saw an ad in Chinese, and they said, "Oh, well, we might as well give it a try," right? So I think what people like Tanisha Dandridge are saying is that we need to build these networks of acupuncture where we can have African American acupuncturists who can be people that Black patients can come to, that they can feel safe with, people who understand them. And that's one of the reasons why she's saying, let's reinvent BANA, let's reinvent the Harlem Institute of Acupuncture.
That totally makes sense. Thank you so much for that. We have a couple of questions in the Q&A, and let me highlight one of them in particular from Amanda Schumann. So she asks, who invited the Black Panthers to China? Was it the Chinese government? And did the Chinese government pay for them to be there? And then she also sort of asks, there's a very interesting, sort of simultaneity between the Black Panther trip to China, and then of course what was happening in terms of ping pong diplomacy, Richard Nixon, etc. And I'm wondering if there is if these stories are sort of happening in parallel, or if there's actually sort of interaction. Was it a deliberate effort by the Chinese government to reach out, for instance, both to the official American government as well as groups like the Black Panthers?
Yes. And again, I'm going to really have to rely on other people's scholarship here. There's a growing body of scholarship on the outreach of the Chinese communists to African Americans. And there was a lot of intellectual theorizing about how does racial oppression and class oppression work together. And Mao came to see a racial oppression as a form of class oppression. And so they did a lot of outreach, right, to the Black revolutionaries, hoping that they could be a force for the spread of, this class warfare and socialism. On the other hand, the Black Panthers explicitly saw Mao, okay, and Maoism as a model. So the short answer to who invited the Black Panthers is the Chinese government invited the Black Panthers. And it was actually a visit, Huey Newton, one of the co-founders of the Black Panthers, had been to China in 1971 and had met the top leaders. And he said, I'd like to send a delegation. And so that's what they did. But there's a huge body of scholarship on it. And I'm afraid I don't have all the names of people at my fingertips, but I can certainly send them if people want to get in touch, or you can Google. There's a lot of stuff. Yeah.
Wonderful. A couple of people in the Q&A have asked whether there's been follow-up from the statements and the actions of the Black Acupuncturist Society since last summer, since the summer of 2020, and in particular, are there outcomes or ongoing projects in this area? Are there efforts at interracial solidarity? Are there specific ways that people can contribute to helping to make Chinese medicine more inclusive professionally and for patients?
Right. So the short answer is there has been a lot of follow-up. The Black Acupuncturist Association has been very active in hosting seminars and get-togethers. There's been a lot of attention around the work of Tolbert Small. And one thing I forgot to mention, he's mentioned in Alondra Nelson's book in the Black Panther health initiatives, but not his acupunctural work. Right. So one of the things that's gotten a lot of attention is Dr. Small's role as a pioneer of acupuncture in the United States, in addition to the attention to Motula Shakur, who was incarcerated later on charges of racketeering and has been trying to get compassionate release. So there are groups who are trying to get him released. He is suffering from advanced cancer, but has been repeatedly denied parole. So there's larger issues of racial discrimination, social justice around that I don't have the time to do justice to here, but there are resources to that as well in our journal. And I'll just say, for example, NADA has been actively sponsoring historical events to talk about the revolutionary roots, a multi-series talks and videos. And the American Association of Acupuncture created a diversity committee. So there has been institutional follow-up after these statements in a lot of important ways. But of course, we all wish people could do more, but things are, progressing and in a very deliberate and active way. Yeah.
That's wonderful. And do you see that, so if someone's to come away from your talk today with a better sense of the history, should they say that the Black Panthers brought acupuncture to the US? Should they think about this as one of, multiple ways in which acupuncture came to the US? Or, you've talked about the 19th century movement. Is there a direct link between what's happened now in the late 20th, early 21st century?
Yeah, so I would say that the Black Panther Party's role in facilitating the introduction of acupuncture in the United States is an important strand that needs to be recognized, that needs to be placed alongside these other strands. And that one of the reasons it's really important is that acupuncture, starting in the 70s and through today, has also been driven by a desire for community care. And I didn't have time to mention the community acupuncture movement, which was created in response to the idea that acupuncture was becoming sort of a bourgeois, modality that was very expensive, right? But alongside the effort to institutionalize acupuncture, to create licensing, right, to really create a profession that can rival the biomedical profession, there's also been a push to preserve these activist community-oriented roots of acupuncture, and the Black Panther Party is a very important chapter in that. So I think that's what I'd like people to come away with, is to understand there's this diverse history, and we need to understand all of it in order to understand who we are today and what this body of practice actually represents.
I can't think of a better statement to end this panel on. Thank you, Ely, so much for presenting your work with this special edition today. We're going to drop the link to the issue again in the chat. And remember, this is open access. And so we welcome everybody to go and look at the issue and learn more about your specific questions. I should say there are some really interesting questions in the Q&A, such as how acupuncture in particular or acupressure works against addiction, which I know we don't really have the time, and maybe you aren't exactly the right person to talk about this, but I think it's very clear from the participation today how much interest there is in this topic. And I really, really thank you for introducing it to us.
Well, thank you so much. It's been such a pleasure. It was a labor of love, and I'm just so happy that I can share it with everybody. And we have lots of footnotes and bibliographic citations, so hopefully there'll be a lot there for people to benefit from.
Fantastic. All right, everybody. Thank you so much for attending today's MLK Day presentation from the Lieberthal-Rogel Center for Chinese Studies. My name is Ann Lin. Thank you very much for participating. And please come to our website. We will post the recording of this presentation today when we have it available. And we also have many other interesting things for you to look at. Thank you.